words, where they created the Islamic State of Afghanistan. Outside influences like Iran and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan supported different factions within the country and prevented adequate governance from forming between the years 1992 and 1996. The Taliban, which was supported by Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, overthrew the government of the Islamic State of Afghanistan in 1996. But not all the Afghans went along with the Taliban. The Tajik population in the north created a front called the United Front to resist the Taliban, and they were led by Ahmad Shah Massoud, who controlled the Northern Alliance of Afghanistan. Now, the Taliban received a lot of support from Pakistan. In fact, President Pervez Musharraf sent more troops against the United Front than the Taliban even had. Massoud in the north set up democratic institutions in the portions of the country that he controlled. And Osama bin Laden moved himself from Sudan into Afghanistan and established training bases and began implementing his plan to attack the United States. Now, he had previously operated in Somalia, in another failed state, and executed attacks there against our embassies in Kenya and in Tanzania, and nearly sunk the USS Cole in Yemen. 2 days before 9/11, the leader of the United Front in the north, Massoud, was assassinated by Al-Qaeda. They assassinated him because he had intelligence that he was attempting to share with the West to alert us to an attack that was soon to follow. 2 days later, the 9/11 attacks occurred against our Pentagon and against our World Trade Center in New York City. In those attacks, 2,973 were killed and over 6,000 injured. And they did it with box cutters. They hijacked our airplanes and took them over with box cutters and weaponized the civilian airliners and fomented an attack against our country, something that no one could even imagine at that time. The Taliban government refused to hand over bin Laden to the United States when we politely asked them to. And shortly thereafter, the U.S. and Britain began a series of airstrikes against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And U.S. and British special forces teamed up with the United Front and on horseback overthrew the Taliban. And the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was created, and Hamid Karzai was elected president of that country in 2003. Now, I said I would make a comparison against what's going on in that country under Taliban rule against what's going on in that country at this time. During the Taliban years, there were only 3 million children in school, all of them male. Under the current government, 6 million children are in school. The phone system barely existed in Afghanistan, and now today 1 in 3 Afghans owns a cell phone. In fact, I could not have done business in Afghanistan if I didn't have my Roshan cell phone to conduct business. Healthcare was a scarce luxury under the Taliban, and today it's available to most of the population. Under the Taliban, half of the population, women and girls, were incarcerated in their homes, not allowed to go outside unless they were escorted by a male family member. Thousands of Shiites were massacred yearly. And Afghanistan, under the Taliban, hosted every Islamic terrorist or insurgent group in the world. Today, their economy is growing at over 20%, although the problem for us is a large part of that is in the opium trade and also through economic aid pouring into the country. And today women have greater freedom and can hold their jobs. Now, according to Time magazine, continuing on with this story about is there hope for Afghanistan, we find today that 6 out of 10 Afghans, or Americans actually should say, oppose the war in Afghanistan. I think we're tired of it. But 6 in 10 Afghans say that their country is moving in the right direction. And 6 in 10 Afghans have a favorable view of the U.S. military presence. Fewer than 1 in 10 Afghans actually supports the Taliban. And the Taliban is being squeezed out of the areas where they're the strongest, in the Kandahar and Helmand province. I found this interesting too. The death rate of the Afghan war is 9 out of 100,000. But the murder rate in Washington, D.C. is 22 per 100,000. Isn't that something to think about? Doesn't say much about our capital, does it? I want to shift now to some comparisons between World War II and today. This is the total number who served in the military during World War II. And incidentally, I found that the Army grew from only 160,000 in 1939 to over 8 million soldiers in 1944. A 50-fold increase in the size of our Army. And the U.S. population at that time was 134 million. So with my calculator, I quickly determined that 12% of the U.S. population served our country in World War II. Today, less than 1% serves in our military, and that includes the reserve components, which include the Air National Guard. The number that's served now, I wasn't able to find an exact figure, but I did find from the Marine Times this piece of information. In the 8 years since September the 11th, American troops have deployed almost 3.3 million times to Iraq and Afghanistan. And the numbers in 2009 show that more than 2 million men and women have shouldered these deployments, with 793,000 of them deploying more than one time. So this is slightly less than 1% of our population now, and of these, the National Guard has deployed 345,000 soldiers and 87,000 Air Guard members. And the total reserve components, the others, have deployed over 600,000 of their members. Today, the National Guard has 45,000 soldiers and 5,600 airmen deployed into that part of the world. And my parent wing, the 145th Airlift Wing in Charlotte, has about 1,400 members, but we have taken over 5,000 individual deployments into Iraq and Afghanistan and the surrounding countries. The casualty rate of World War II, very high. From the 16 million